The Great Crusade, humanity's golden age. The Primarchs had been found, the Legion stood united, the Emperor's dream was becoming reality. Across the galaxy, humanity was rising once again. For the first time in thousands of years, mankind was no longer fighting simply to survive. It was beginning to conquer. The galaxy had entered a new age. For thousands of years, humanity had been divided. The age of strife had shattered the old civilizations. Worlds had been isolated from one another. Entire populations had forgotten the terror had even existed. Some had descended into barbarism. Others had created civilizations of astonishing sophistication. But all had shared one thing: they were alone. Then the Emperor came. From terror, the fleets of the Great Crusade spread outward. One world at a time, one system at a time, one civilization at a time. Humanity was being reunited, and now the Emperor's greatest weapons had returned to him. Primarchs, 20 sons, 20 legions, 20 extraordinary minds capable of commanding armies across the stars. Together, they would transform the galaxy. The greatest military force humanity had ever seen. The Legion as Astartes were unlike anything humanity had created before. Each Space Marine was already a warrior beyond the capabilities of an ordinary man. But under the command of a Primarch, an entire Legion became something else. A weapon capable of conquering worlds. The Primarchs were not simply generals. They were living embodiments of their legions. The Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, the Emperor's Children, the Iron Warriors, the White Scars, the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, the Iron Hands, the Ultramarines, the Death Guard, and the others. Each possessed its own traditions, its own methods, its own identity, and its own Primarch. The Great Crusade had become a machine of almost unimaginable power. The Emperor's vision. But the Great Crusade was never supposed to be conquest for conquest's sake. The Emperor wanted something far greater, a unified humanity. A civilization capable of surviving without that constant threat of extinction. The worlds reclaimed by the Imperium were expected to contribute to that future. Populations, resources, knowledge, their technology, armies, and their cultures. Everything would become part of something larger. The Emperor believed humanity could once again become the greatest power in the galaxy. But there was one thing he feared above all else: humanity's dependence upon the warp. Because the warp was not merely a means of traveling between the stars. It was something far more dangerous, a realm of nightmares, and the Emperor had a plan to free humanity from it. A plan so secret, even many of his sons knew nothing about it. The Emperor leaves his sons. Eventually, the Emperor made a decision that would change the Great Crusade forever. He would return to Terra. His sons would continue the conquest without him. To many within the Imperium, this seemed like the natural next step. The Primarchs had proven themselves. They could command entire campaigns independently. The Emperor no longer needed to personally lead every battle. But the real reason for his return was hidden. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the Emperor had begun constructing something extraordinary. Something that could change the destiny of mankind. The Imperial Webway. If the project succeeded, humanity could travel the galaxy without relying upon the warp. No dangerous warp currents, no dependence upon navigators, and no exposure to the horrors of the Imperium. The Emperor believed this could be the key to humanity's permanent survival, but completing the project required his full attention. So he entrusted the Great Crusade to his sons, and among them, one stood above the rest: Horus Heresy. The rise of the Warmaster. Horus had been the Emperor's first son, his closest companion, his most trusted general. He had fought beside the Emperor during the earliest days of the Crusade. He knew his father's methods. He understood his vision. He knew the Primarchs, and most importantly, the Primarchs trusted him. When the Emperor announced that Horus would become Warmaster, the responsibility was immense. Horus would now command the Great Crusade itself. The Emperor was effectively placing the future of humanity into his son's hands. It was the greatest honor a Primarch could receive, and perhaps the greatest burden. Horus had spent his entire life trying to prove himself worthy of his father's trust. Now he had it. But trust can become a burden when the person you want approval from is no longer beside you. The Golden Age. For a time everything worked. The Great Crusade continued. Worlds fell beneath Imperial banners. Lost human civilizations were rediscovered. Ancient technologies were recovered. Trade routes reopened. Cities were rebuilt. The Primarchs became legends. Sanguinius inspired entire populations. Guilliman built an empire within the Imperium. Dawn created fortresses that could withstand almost anything. Vulcan protected civilians. Rus hunted the enemies of mankind. The Khan raced across the stars. The Lion destroyed threats before they could ever grow. And Horus coordinated them all. The Imperium was becoming something extraordinary. Humanity had survived Old Night. Now it was reclaiming the galaxy. But not everyone was happy. Beneath the victories, the Primarchs remained individuals, and individuals have different dreams, fears, ambitions, and different wounds. Some were content, others were not. Angron remained trapped inside his own rage. Mortarion carried resentment towards the Emperor. Perturabe believed his talents were constantly overlooked. Kurz became increasingly disturbed by his visions. Magnus pushed deeper into the mysteries of the Warp. And Lorgar. Lorgar had a problem that would prove far more dangerous. He believed the Emperor was a god. The Emperor had forbidden such beliefs, but Lorgar could not simply abandon them. He needed something to worship. And when the Emperor finally decided to confront him, the consequences would be devastating. The first crack. The Great Crusade had been built upon unity, but unity requires everyone to believe in the same destination. The Emperor believed humanity's future belonged to reason. Lorgar believed humanity needed faith. The difference seemed philosophical, perhaps even harmless, but to the Emperor it was dangerous, because faith had always been connected to the Warp. And the Warp was precisely what the Emperor was trying to defeat. Soon, father and son would collide, not on a battlefield, but over the very meaning of humanity's future. And when they did, and an entire city would burn, its name was Monarchia. The Great Crusade was reaching its greatest heights. Humanity had never been stronger. The Emperor's sons had become legends. The Imperium stretched farther every year. The future looked almost perfect, but beneath the surface, the first major fracture was forming. A Primarch's faith, father's disappointment, and a city condemned. A brother ordered to carry out the punishment. The Emperor believed he was correcting one of his sons. He didn't realize he was creating another enemy, because after Monarchia, Lorgar would never look at his father the same way again, and somewhere in the darkness, something was waiting for him. Horus becomes Warmaster, the Emperor's chosen son. For decades, Horus had fought beside his father. He had watched the Emperor conquer worlds. He had stood at his side when the first Primarchs were found. He had become the brother his brothers trusted, but now the Emperor was leaving, and someone would have to take his place. The Great Crusade had grown beyond anything the Emperor could personally command. The Imperium stretched across thousands of worlds. Hundreds of expeditionary fleets were operating simultaneously. Entire sectors could spend years without seeing the Emperor himself. His sons had become commanders of vast military forces, and the Primarchs had proven they could conquer worlds without their father's direct supervision. But there was a problem. Someone needed to coordinate them. Someone needed to make decisions when the Primarchs disagreed. Someone needed to carry the Emperor's authority beyond Terra. Someone needed to become Warmaster. The most important choice. The Emperor's decision would have consequences far beyond military command. The Warmaster would effectively become the supreme commander of the Great Crusade. The Primarchs would answer to him. Legions would follow his orders. Expeditionary fleets would move according to his strategy. Entire campaigns could be redirected by his command. The Warmaster would stand closer to the Emperor's authority than any other human being. It was therefore one of the most important decisions the Emperor ever had to make. And there were several obvious candidates. The Primarchs who could have been chosen. Roby Guilliman possessed an extraordinary understanding of logistics and governance. Rogel Dawn was perhaps the most disciplined of the Primarchs. The Lion was an exceptional strategist. Sanguinius possessed extraordinary charisma and the respect of nearly all of his brothers. Russ commanded enormous loyalty. Even Magnus possessed an intellect that could rival almost anyone, but the Emperor did not choose them. He chose Horus. And there was a simple reason. Horus had something the others did not possess in quite the same way. He could bring them together. Horus Lupercal. Horus had been the first Primarch recovered by the Emperor. He had spent years fighting alongside his father. He had witnessed the birth of the Great Crusade. He had watched the Emperor discover his brothers, and unlike many of them, Horus knew the Emperor personally, not simply as a ruler, not simply as a military commander, but as a father. That gave Horus an extraordinary position. He understood how the Emperor thought. He understood his ambitions, his methods, and perhaps most importantly, he understood his sons. Horus could speak to the Lion. He could laugh with Russ. He could reason with Guilliman. He could challenge Dawn, admire Sanguinius. He could even find common ground with the more difficult Primarchs. He was the bridge between them. The announcement. The announcement was made before the assembled Primarchs. The Emperor revealed that he would be returning to Terra. His work there required his attention. The Great Crusade would continue, but now it would be Horus who carried the authority of the Warmaster. For a moment, the galaxy's greatest warriors stood together in silence. Then the reactions began. Some Primarchs welcomed the decision. Some were unsurprised. Others perhaps wondered why they had not been chosen, but very few openly challenged it. Because Horus had earned their respect, this was not simply a political appointment. It was a recognition of decades of service. Horus had been fighting for the Emperor longer than most of his brothers had even known him. Sanguinius. Among the Primarchs, Sanguinius was one of Horus's closest friends. He understood the burden his brother had accepted, and perhaps more than anyone, he knew Horus was capable of carrying it. Sanguinius did not envy him, he respected him. He believed Horus would lead wisely. The relationship between the two brothers would become one of the most important in the coming years, because Sanguinius saw something in Horus that many others overlooked. Not merely a warrior, not merely a warmaster, a man who desperately wanted to be worthy of his father's trust. The Lion. Lionel Johnson was different. The Lion respected Horus, but he was not a man who surrendered authority easily. He believed himself capable of commanding the Great Crusade, and there was no denying his abilities, but the Lion understood the Emperor's decision. Horus had something he lacked: political influence amongst the Primarchs. the ability to unite personalities that could otherwise tear one another apart. The Lion could win wars, Horus could unite people fighting them. It was an important distinction. Guilliman. Roboute Guilliman also accepted the decision. He understood the importance of hierarchy. The Great Crusade required coordination of an enormous scale. Someone needed to sit above the individual expeditionary fleets. Someone needed to see the entire strategic picture. Guilliman could appreciate that. He did not need to be a Warmaster to contribute. His own realm was already become one of the Imperium's greatest centers of civilization. Horus would command the Crusade. Guilliman would help build what the Crusade conquered. For a time, the arrangement worked perfectly. The Emperor's trust, but there was something else behind the decision, something personal. The Emperor trusted Horus perhaps more than anyone else. Horus had spent years proving himself. Every victory reinforced that trust. Every campaign demonstrated his judgment. Every reunion with another Primarch strengthened the relationship. When the Emperor finally returned to Terra, he left the Great Crusade in Horus's hands. That decision had something extraordinary with it. The Emperor believed Horus could be trusted with everything: his armies, his sons, the Imperium, his dream. Everything. The weight of the title. But there was a darker side to the promotion. The Warmaster was no longer simply another Primarch. He was responsible for everything, for every defeat, political dispute, every delayed campaign, every legion lost in battle, every world that resisted. The Emperor had effectively placed the weight of the entire crusade upon Horus's shoulders, and then he left. Imagine what that meant. For decades, Horus had been able to turn to his father. Now the Emperor was thousands of light years away. Horus could no longer simply ask what his father wanted. He had to decide. He had to interpret the Emperor's intentions. He had to lead his brothers. And every decision he made would be judged against the impossible standard of the Emperor himself. The sons of the Emperor. There was another problem. The Primarchs were brothers, but they were also rivals. Each had his own legion, each possessed immense pride. Each believed his methods were superior in certain circumstances. Horus now had to command men who were almost his equals. The Lion would not blindly obey. Russ would challenge orders he disagreed with. Perturabo could resent decisions he believed were strategically flawed. Magnus would question conventional wisdom. Angron would often refuse to cooperate. Kurz was increasingly unpredictable. Horus needed more than authority. He needed influence, he needed trust, and he needed to keep his brothers united. Horus and his father. Yet beneath all of this, there remained something deeply personal. Horus wanted his father's approval, perhaps more than any other Primarch. He had spent his life beside the Emperor. The relationship was unique. Horus had been the first. He had experienced years of companionship that his brothers never received. Now his father was leaving. The Emperor's departure could not help but feel like separation. Horus understood the reasons, he accepted them. But understanding something intellectually does not make it emotionally easy. The Warmaster had everything: authority, respect, power. The greatest military position in human history, but he had lost the one thing he could never replace: his father's constant presence. The Emperor's final trust. The Emperor stood before his sons. The Great Crusade continued. Terror awaited him. The Webway Project demanded his attention, and Horus would carry the torch. Perhaps the Emperor believed this was the final stage of his son's development. They no longer needed him. They were ready to lead humanity themselves. Horus certainly believed he was ready. He had trained for this moment. He had spent decades learning from the greatest leader humanity had ever known. He would continue the Emperor's work. He would finish the Crusade, and when the day came, humanity would stand united beneath the Imperial banner. That was the dream. The departure. The Emperor left, his fleet turned toward Terra. The Primarchs watched. The Warmaster remained behind. For the first time, Horus stood at the head of the Great Crusade without his father beside him. The responsibility was now his. The galaxy waited. Thousands of worlds still remained outside Imperial control. Millions of human beings still lived beyond the borders of the Imperium. The Crusade could not stop. Horus turned towards the stars and gave the order. Advance. The Golden Age continues. The decision appeared to be a complete success. Under Horus, the Great Crusade continued expanding. His strategic brilliance became legendary. The Warmaster coordinated multiple legions across vast distances. He negotiated with allies. He managed rivalries. He directed campaigns. He became exactly what the Emperor had hoped, a leader capable of uniting the Primarchs. For a time, nothing went wrong. The Imperium grew stronger. The Crusade moved faster. The future looked secure. But beneath that success, something had changed. Horus was no longer simply the Emperor's son. He was now the Emperor's representative. And with that came an uncomfortable question. What happens when the representative begins to wonder whether his father still needs him? The Emperor had chosen his Warmaster. Horus Lupercal stood at the head of the greatest military campaign humanity had ever launched. His brothers followed him, the legions obeyed him, the Imperium trusted him. He had everything a Primarch could possibly desire, but Horus was still human enough to feel something else. Distance. The Emperor was gone. The father he had spent decades beside was now hidden away on Terra. And Horus was left to carry the dream alone. Now he remained loyal, completely. He believed in his father, he believed in the Imperium, he believed in the future. But loyalty can be tested. And even Horus would be given a choice that would determine the fate of humanity. And when that moment came, the Warmaster would discover just how much the Emperor's trust truly weighed. The Imperium at its height, humanity's greatest age. The Emperor had returned to Terra, Horus had become Warmaster. The Primarchs commanded their legions, and the Great Crusade continued. Across the galaxy, humanity was rising. For the first time since Old Night, mankind could look toward the stars and believe they belonged to them. The Great Crusade had become something almost impossible to comprehend. What had begun as a campaign to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity had become the largest military and political expansion in human history. Hundreds of fleets across the galaxy, thousands of worlds were brought into compliance. Entire civilizations were rediscovered. Ancient human colonies that had been isolated for thousands of years were reunited with Terra. For the people of the Imperium, this was not merely a war. It was a renaissance, a return, a homecoming. Humanity was finally becoming one species again. A galaxy being reconnected. Imagine living on a human world during this era. For generations, your ancestors had believed they were alone. The stars were unreachable. The old stories of Terra had become myths. Then one day, the sky fills with enormous ships. Thousands of vessels descend from orbit, their hulls carrying the symbols of the Imperium. And from those ships emerge warriors unlike anything your world has ever seen. Space Marines. And behind them, a Primarch. A living son of the Emperor, a figure you see more like a god than a man. The message is simple, you are not alone. Humanity survived, Terra exists, and you are coming home. For many worlds, the arrival of the Imperium was welcomed. For others, it was resisted, and resistance meant war. Compliance. The Imperium rarely described its campaigns as conquest. It called them compliance. The objective was to bring human worlds into the Imperial fold, Sometimes this happened peacefully. A world might accept imperial authority after negotiations. Its government would remain largely intact. Its population would become part of the wider Imperium. Its resources and military strength would be integrated into the Crusade. But not every world accepted the Emperor's offer. Some had created powerful civilizations during Old Night. Some believed they were already superior. Some had no desire to surrender their independence, and some were simply too dangerous to leave alone. When diplomacy failed, the legions went to war. The Primarchs at war. This was where the differences between the Primarchs became most obvious. Each had developed a unique way of fighting. The Emperor had not created 20 copies of the same general. He had created 20 completely different commanders. Each legion became an extension of its Primarch. The Lion and the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels were among the most secretive and versatile of the legions. Under Lionel Johnson, they could fight almost any kind of war: mass battles, sieges, counterinsurgency, Xenos extermination. They were among the Emperor's most dangerous weapons. The Lion rarely cared about glory, he cared about results. If an enemy had to be destroyed, he destroyed it. If a secret had to remain hidden, it remained hidden. The Lion was not interested in being loved, he wanted victory, and he was exceptionally good at it. The Wolf King. Then there was Leman Russ. Where the Lion was controlled, Russ was instinctive. The Space Wolves fought like hunters, fast, aggressive, relentless. Russ understood morale. He understood fear. He understood the psychological side of war. When the Space Wolves arrived, the enemies knew they were being hunted. Russ also developed a reputation as the Emperor's executioner. When something had to be dealt with, something that other legions could not or would not handle, the Space Wolves could be called upon. But behind the warrior was a Primarch fiercely loyal to his brothers. Russ could laugh with them, fight beside them, and defend them, even when he pretended not to care. Guilliman's Empire. Raby Guilliman approached the Great Crusade differently. To Guilliman, winning a war was only the beginning. A conquered world needed administration, infrastructure, industry, education, trade, defense, and government. Guilliman believed civilization had to be built after victory. This philosophy transformed Ultramar. Instead of simply conquering worlds, the Ultramarines created a functional empire. Prosperous, organized, and stable, Ultramar became one of the greatest regions in the Imperium, and Guilliman demonstrated something important. The Great Crusade was not merely destroying civilizations. In many places, it was building new ones. Dawn's Walls. Rogel Dawn understood defense better than almost anyone. The Imperial Fists were masters of fortification. Where Guilliman built governments, Dawn built walls, massive fortresses, defensive networks, void shields, bastions, strongholds capable of surviving enormous assaults. Dawn believed that victory did not always mean destroying the enemy. Sometimes victory meant surviving them. This philosophy would eventually become incredibly important, because the greatest fortress humanity would ever construct would be the Imperial Palace on Terra, and Dawn would one day be responsible for defending it. The Angel. Then there was Sanguinius. The Blood Angels were terrifying warriors, but their Primarch was something else entirely. Sanguinius possessed an extraordinary ability to inspire. Wherever he went, people believed, not because he demanded loyalty, but because he seemed to embody the very ideal the Imperium claimed to represent: nobility, courage, compassion, and strength. The Angel became one of the most beloved figures in the Imperium. Even among his brothers, Sanguinius was respected. And perhaps more importantly, he was trusted. The Great Khan. Jagatai Khan had little interest in bureaucracy. He valued freedom, movement, the open road. The White Scars became masters of lightning warfare. They could cross enormous distances at terrifying speed. strike an enemy, destroy its command structure, and disappear before a counterattack could begin. The Khan understood something many commanders did not. You did not always need to destroy an army. Sometimes you simply needed to make it impossible for that army to catch you. Vulcan and the Salamanders. Vulcan represented another side of the Great Crusade. The Salamanders were warriors, but they were also protectors. Vulcan valued human life. He believed civilians mattered. The victory meant little if the innocent were simply treated as acceptable casualties. This philosophy made the Salamanders unusual amongst the legions. They were not merely conquerors, they were guardians, and Vulcan himself became one of the most compassionate of the Primarchs. Perturabo's War. But not every Primarch received admiration. Perturabo and the Iron Warriors were indispensable. They fought the wars nobody wanted, sieges, fortifications, attrition, grinding campaigns that could last years. The Iron Warriors would reduce enormous fortresses to rubble again, and again, and again. But their victories often came at an enormous cost, and Perturabo noticed something. The Imperium expected him to win. It rarely celebrated how he won. His brothers received glory, he received another impossible fortress, another impossible campaign, another mountain to destroy. The resentment grew, quietly and patiently. The Imperium's industry. The Great Crusade could not have existed without another power, the Mechanicum of Mars. The alliance between Terra and Mars created one of the most powerful industrial partnerships in human history. Mars provided weapons, warships, Titan legions, vehicles, armor, machines, weapons capable of destroying entire armies. The Imperium provided manpower, resources, worlds. Together they created the industrial machine required to sustain the Crusade. Every victory created more resources. Those resources created more ships. More ships created more Space Marines. More Space Marines conquered more worlds. The cycle continued. The Imperium grew and grew. The Imperial Truth. Behind the military expansion, another revolution was taking place. The Imperial Truth. The Emperor rejected religion, superstition, myth, and the supernatural. Humanity was encouraged to embrace reason, science, knowledge, and progress. The Emperor believed that mankind needed to understand the universe rather than fear it. The old gods were dismissed as primitive beliefs. The warp was treated as a dangerous natural phenomenon. And the idea that the Emperor himself was divine was forbidden. For many worlds, this was liberating. For others, it was devastating. Because religion had been part of human civilization for thousands of years. And one Primarch in particular could not accept its destruction. Lorgar. The first signs of trouble. From a distance, the Imperium looked perfect, but the Primarchs were not perfect. They were extraordinary, but they were still individuals. Angron was consumed by rage. Kurz was haunted by visions. Perturabo was bitter. Mortarion distrusted the Emperor. Magnus pushed against boundaries. Lorgar sought meaning, and Horus carried the weight of all of them. The Emperor believed his sons could manage themselves. Perhaps he was right for a while. But the Great Crusade was coming and becoming so large that even small disagreements could have enormous consequences. The Age of Triumph. And yet, despite everything, these incredible times, humanity was winning. World after world joined the Imperium. Lost brothers were reunited. Ancient technologies returned and new civilizations flourished. The Primarchs became legends. The Emperor's dream appeared closer than ever. And for ordinary Imperial citizens, this was the beginning of a golden age, where children grew up believing the Imperium would last forever, and that the Emperor would protect them, that the Primarchs would always stand together, and that humanity had finally escaped darkness. But what they did not know was that the darkness had never truly left. It had simply been waiting. The Great Crusade had reached its height. Humanity had never been stronger. The Imperium had never been larger. The Primarchs had never been more powerful, and Horus had never been more important. Everything appeared to be moving exactly as the Emperor had planned. But beneath the triumph, something was wrong. One Primarch believed his father was a god. Another believed his father had abandoned him, and another believed his brothers received the glory he deserved. And another was beginning to question the very nature of the warp. The Emperor had built an empire capable of conquering the galaxy, but empires are not held together by armies alone. They require loyalty, trust, belief. And those things were beginning to disappear. Soon one of the Emperor's sons would be forced to kneel. One of the Imperium's greatest cities would be destroyed, and one of the Warmaster's closest brothers would begin a journey that would eventually lead him toward chaos. The Great Crusade was reaching its greatest victory, but the seeds of its greatest tragedy had already been planted. The victories of the Primarchs. 20 sons of war. They were not ordinary generals, they were Primarchs, 20 sons of the Emperor, 20 visions of war. Each had his own method, each had his own legion, and each would leave a mark upon the galaxy. The Great Crusade was not one war, it was thousands. Across the galaxy, Imperial fleets fought simultaneously on countless worlds. Some campaigns lasted weeks, others lasted decades. Some ended with peaceful compliance, others ended with the entire civilizations being destroyed. At the center of these campaigns stood the Primarchs. They were more than commanders, they were symbols. When a Primarch arrived, his legion followed, and when his legion arrived, victory often followed soon after. But no two Primarchs fought the same way. Their personalities shaped their legions reflected their fathers, and their victories became legends. The Dark Angels, the First Legion. The Dark Angels were amongst the Emperor's earliest creations. They were disciplined, adaptable, extremely dangerous. Under Lionel Johnson, they became masters of almost every form of warfare. Their greatest strength was versatility. They could deploy infantry, armor, artillery, aircraft, specialized formations, and devastating weapons from the Legion's ancient arsenal. The Lion rarely fought simply to prove his strength. He studied the enemy, found its weakness, and then he destroyed it. The Dark Angels became one of the most feared legions of the Great Crusade, but their secrecy meant that few outsiders understood exactly what they were capable of. The Emperor's Children, the pursuit of perfection. Fulgrim's Legion began with a simple ideal: excellence. Every action should be performed perfectly, every weapon maintained perfectly, every battle executed perfectly, every victory beautiful. The Emperor's Children were originally small in number after suffering catastrophic losses early in their history, but Fulgrim transformed them. He rebuilt his legion. He demanded discipline, culture, artistry, skill. The legion became famous for its elegance, but there was danger hidden inside perfection. Because perfection has no end, there is always something better, something faster, something more beautiful, and something more powerful. Eventually, Fulgrim's desire for perfection would become obsession. The Iron Warriors, masters of the siege. If the Emperor needed a fortress destroyed, he called Perturabo. The Iron Warriors understood warfare in its most brutal form. They studied walls, defenses, supply lines, weak points. They could calculate exactly how long a fortress could survive, then they would break it. Besiege warfare was rarely glorious. It was slow, brutal, and exhausting. The Iron Warriors suffered enormous casualties. They fought battles that other legions avoided, and Perturabo became increasingly bitter. He believed his brothers were celebrated for heroic victories, while he was sent to do all the dirty work. The Iron Warriors won again and again, but victory never seemed to satisfy their Primarch. The White Scars. The speed of the storm. Jagatai Khan fought differently. The White Scars did not want prolonged battles, they wanted movement speed and surprise. The Khan understood that an enemy army could be destroyed without destroying every soldier. Strike the command structure, destroy communications, cut supply lines, attack from an unexpected direction, then disappear. The White Scars became masters of mobile warfare. Their attacks could occur hundreds of miles apart. An enemy might believe itself surrounded, only to discover the White Scars had already moved elsewhere. The Khan was not interested in fighting the enemy where they expected him. He wanted to fight where they were the weakest. The Space Wolves, the Emperor's hunters. Leman Russ brought something entirely different. The Space Wolves were aggressive, direct and fierce. They embraced their reputation as warriors. But there was more to Russ than savagery. He understood loyalty, he understood brotherhood, and he understood the importance of morale. The Space Wolves often fought as if they were hunting prey. They tracked, they isolated, they surrounded, then they struck. Russ became one of the Emperor's most trusted weapons against particularly dangerous enemies. When diplomacy failed, the Wolves were sometimes sent in. The Imperial Fists, the unbreakable wall. Rogel Dawn represented discipline. The Imperial Fists were masters of defense. But they were not passive. They could attack just as effectively. Their discipline allowed them to maintain formation under enormous pressure. Their defenses could transform entire worlds into fortresses. Dawn believed that strength came from preparation. If an enemy attacked, the Imperial Fists were ready. If a fortress needed to be held, they would hold it. If a civilization needed protection, they could build the walls, and one day Dawn would be called upon to build the greatest fortress of them all, Terra. The Blood Angels, the Angels' Legion. Sanguinius and the Blood Angels were amongst the most admired forces of the Imperium. They possessed extraordinary speed, strength, and martial skill. But what truly separated them was their Primarch. Sanguinius inspired loyalty through compassion. He did not need to threaten his warriors, they followed him because they believed in him. His presence could transform morale. His appearance became a symbol, hope. Yet the Blood Angels carried a hidden darkness. Their genes contained flaws. A thirst for blood, a darkness beneath the surface, something the Legion struggled to control. For now, they remained loyal. But their greatest battle would eventually become one against themselves. The Ultramarines, builders of civilization. Robu Guilliman approached war as part of a larger system. An enemy defeated was not enough. A world needed to function afterward. Governments had to be established. Roads, factories, schools, military bases, trade routes. The Ultramarines excelled at turning conquered territories into productive imperial worlds. Guilliman created Ultramar, a realm so prosperous that it became a model for imperial governance. His victories were not always spectacular, but they lasted, and perhaps that made them even more important. Guilliman wasn't simply conquering the galaxy, he was building the civilization that would inherit it. The Salamanders, the Protectors. Vulcan Salamanders were unusual. They fought fiercely, but they also cared deeply about ordinary people. Vulcan believed the Emperor's dream was ultimately about humanity, not just armies, not just Primarchs, not just Space Marines, but human beings. When worlds were conquered, the Salamanders often remained behind to help rebuild. Vulcan's philosophy was simple. If humanity was worth saving, then individual humans mattered. That made him one of the most compassionate Primarchs and one of the most respected. The Raven Guard, Masters of the Shadow. Corvus Corax understood rebellion. He had been a revolutionary himself. The Raven Guard specialized in infiltration, sabotage, ambush, precision strikes. Where another legion might deploy an army, Corax might deploy a handful of warriors, destroy a command center, eliminate key leaders, disable defenses, and disappear. The enemy might not even know the Raven Guard had arrived until it was too late. Corax understood that the strongest army could be defeated if you removed the right pieces. The Iron Hands, strength through steel. Ferrus Manus believed weakness had no place in the Imperium. The Iron Hands embraced technology, augmentation, machines, and heavy weapons. Ferrus himself was famous for his metal-covered hands, but beneath the philosophy was something far deeper. Ferrus hated weakness. He wanted humanity to become stronger and harder, more capable of surviving the horrors of the galaxy. His friendship with Fulgrim became one of the strongest relationships between the Primarchs, two brothers united by ambition, two brothers obsessed with excellence. Neither knew how important that friendship would become. The Death Guard, the warriors who endured. Mortarion had grown up in a world where survival required endurance. The Death Guard reflected that philosophy. They could fight through conditions that would destroy other armies, poison, toxic environments, chemical warfare, attrition. The Death Guard simply kept moving. Mortarion hated weakness, he hated tyrants, and he hated anything that reminded him of the overlords of Barbarous. He believed strength came from endurance, from suffering, from refusing to break, but his hatred of weakness would eventually lead him towards something far darker. The Thousand Suns, knowledge without limits. Magnus the Red was different. His legion pursued knowledge, psychic abilities, ancient mysteries, the secrets of the warp. Magnus believed knowledge itself was not evil. Ignorance was the real danger. If humanity understood the warp, perhaps it could control it. Perhaps it could master it. Perhaps it could use its power without becoming corrupted. The Emperor disagreed, but Magnus believed his father was simply being overly cautious. It was a disagreement that would become catastrophic. The World Eaters, the Butcher's Legion. Angron's legion was unlike almost any other. The World Eaters were built for close combat, they charged and they killed. They conquered through overwhelming violence. The Butcher's nails had changed Angron, and through him they changed his legion. Combat became more than warfare, it became an addiction. A dangerous one. Pain, rage, blood. The World Eaters were devastating, but they were also becoming increasingly difficult to control. Angron was not interested in the Emperor's grand vision. He was interested in one thing, and one thing only, and that was war. The Word Bearers, the faithful. Lorgar's Word Bearers were different again. They did not simply conquer worlds, they spread ideology, the imperial truth. At least they were supposed to. But Lorgar struggled with the Emperor's rejection of religion. He believed humanity needed something greater than itself, something to worship, something to give existence meaning. His legion built monuments, cathedrals, shrines, cities dedicated to the Emperor. And eventually, the Emperor had enough. The Night Lords, terror from the darkness. Conrad Kurz believed fear was the greatest weapon. The Night Lords embraced terror. They did not simply defeat enemies, they broke them psychologically. Executions, public displays, night attacks, psychological warfare. Kurz believed criminals should be controlled through fear, and on Nostromo he had proved it. But his methods became increasingly horrific. The line between justice and cruelty began to disappear. Even the Emperor's other sons were disturbed by him. The Ravening of Worlds. The Great Crusade continued. Every legion added its own victories, every Primarch added another chapter to the Imperium's history. World after world fell, some peacefully, some violently. Some barely survived, but the Imperium kept expanding. The galaxy seemed to have no answer. The Primarchs were too powerful, the legions were too numerous, the Mechanicum supplied endless weapons, the Imperial Navy controlled the stars, and the Emperor's dream appeared unstoppable. The price of victory. But every victory had a cost. Millions died, sometimes billions. Entire cultures disappeared, old traditions were erased, civilizations were absorbed, others were destroyed. The Imperium called this compliance, and to its enemies, it was called conquest. And that distinction mattered, because not every world accepted the Emperor's vision, not every human wanted to become part of his Imperium, and not every Primarch agreed with the methods used to build it. But the Great Crusade was creating unity, but it was also creating resentment. 20 brothers. The Primarchs stood at the center of everything. They were heroes, kings, warriors, generals, symbols, but they were also brothers, and brothers compete. They compared victories, they judged each other's methods, they argued, they insulted one another, sometimes they fought. Most of these conflicts were harmless, some were not, because beneath the laughter there were grudges, beneath the victories there was jealousy, and beneath the unity there was division. The coming storm. The Great Crusade had reached its height, the Imperium had never been stronger, but the Primarchs were beginning to drift apart. Some believed the Emperor trusted certain brothers more than others. Some believed that they were being denied recognition. Some believed their father did not understand them, and one Primarch believed his father had betrayed everything he believed in. And that was Lorgar. Soon the Emperor would confront him. The consequences would shake the foundations of the Imperium. A city would be destroyed, a legion would be humiliated, and the Primarch's faith would be shattered. But the Emperor did not know what would come afterward, neither did Horus, neither did the other Primarchs, because the next great battle of the Great Crusade would not be fought against an alien empire, it would be fought over belief, and the battlefield would be Monarchia. The Primarchs had conquered the galaxy. They had fought impossible wars. They had destroyed ancient enemies. They had reunited humanity. They had built an empire unlike anything mankind had ever known. They were heroes, legends. They were gods amongst men. But legends have flaws. Gods can fall. The Great Crusade had given humanity its greatest victories, but it also created something else: pride, jealousy, resentment, fear, and eventually betrayal. The Emperor created 20 sons to conquer the galaxy. He had succeeded. Now he would discover whether he had created 20 sons capable of living together. The tragedy of Monarchia. The day a son lost his faith. Lorgar loved his father, perhaps more than any of the other Primarchs. He did not simply follow the Emperor, he worshipped him. And that was precisely the problem. The Great Crusade was reaching its height. World after world was joining the Imperium. The Emperor's sons were conquering the galaxy. The imperial truth was spreading. Humanity was being taught to reject superstition, to reject religion, to reject the belief in gods. The Emperor wanted humanity to understand the universe through reason, but one of his sons could not accept that. Lorgar Aurelian. To Lorgar, the Emperor was not simply his father. He was something far greater. He was divine. And Lorgar's word-bearers had dedicated themselves to spreading that belief across the galaxy. They built monuments, cities, temples, cathedrals. They preached the Emperor's divinity to every world they conquered. And at first, Lorgar believed he was doing exactly what his father wanted. He was spreading the Emperor's glory. He was creating a civilization united by faith. He could not have been more wrong. The Word Bearers. Lorgar's legion had always been different. While other legions measured their success through military victories, the Word Bearers measured theirs through conversions. A world wasn't truly conquered until its people accepted the Imperial truth, and Lorgar believed the Emperor represented the greatest truth of all. He had been raised on Colchis, a world dominated by religion. As a child, Lorgar had searched for meaning. He had studied ancient texts, he had listened to prophets, he had sought answers about the nature of existence. Then the Emperor arrived. To Lorgar, everything suddenly made sense. The Emperor was the answer. The being who had united humanity, the Father who had created the Primarchs, the greatest being Lorgar had ever encountered. Lorgar believed he had finally found his god, but the Emperor had never wanted to be worshipped. The Imperial truth. The Emperor's philosophy was brutally clear. There were no gods. There were no supernatural forces. There was only reality, science, reason, and human potential. The Emperor wanted humanity to abandon the beliefs that divided it for thousands of years. He believed religion made humanity vulnerable. And after everything he knew about the war, he had good reason to fear it. But Lorgar did not see the Emperor's reasoning. He saw hypocrisy. But how could an ordinary man create 20 Primarchs? How could he live for thousands of years? How could he possess powers beyond human understanding? And how could he command an empire spanning the galaxy? To Lorgar, the answer was obvious. The Emperor was a god. Monarchia. Eventually, one world became the ultimate symbol of Lorgar's faith, Monarchia, the capital of 500 worlds of Ultramar. It was a magnificent city. Its people had embraced the Imperial truth, but beneath the surface, the Word Bearers had built something else. Monuments to the Emperor, cathedrals, statues, temples, they filled the city with religious imagery. The Emperor's image dominated the skyline, and to Lorgar, Monarchia was beautiful. It represented everything he believed in the Imperium and what the Imperium should become. But to the Emperor, it represented failure. Lorgar had been warned again and again to stop worshipping the Emperor himself. Stop building temples, stop spreading religion, embrace the Imperial truth. But Lorgar continued, and eventually the Emperor lost his patience. The Emperor's judgment. The Emperor could have simply punished Lorgar. He could have removed him from command. He could have destroyed the temples. Instead, he chose something far more devastating. He ordered the Ultramarines to punish the Word Bearers. Roboute Guilliman was given the task, and the city of Monarchia was condemned. The Word Bearers were ordered to stand down. Their people were evacuated. Then the city was destroyed. Not because Monarchia had rebelled, not because its people had attacked the Imperium, but because Lorgar had disobeyed his father. For Lorgar, it was unimaginable. His father, the being he worshipped, had ordered the destruction of everything he had built. The pilgrimage of shame. The Word Bearers were forced to kneel. Lorgar was made to witness the destruction. His legion stood before the Emperor, and there was no praise, no forgiveness, no understanding, only judgment. The Emperor told Lorgar that he had failed. His legion had wasted time. Instead of conquering worlds efficiently, they had spent years building temples. Instead of spreading the Imperial truth, they had spread superstition. The Emperor considered the entire campaign a failure. Lorgar had expected recognition. He received humiliation. And then came the final blow. His brothers watched. The Word Bearers were forced to kneel before the Emperor. The Primarch, who believed himself the most devoted, was treated as one of the greatest failures. Guilliman. At the center of the punishment stood Roboute Guilliman. The Ultramarines had carried out the Emperor's orders. Guilliman did not necessarily hate Lorgar, but he followed his father's command. To Lorgar, that distinction did not matter. He saw Guilliman as the instrument of his humiliation. The city was destroyed, his legion was disgraced. His faith was shattered. Lorgar blamed his father, but he also blamed the brother who had carried out the order. A resentment began forming, one that would survive for centuries. The silence. After Monarchia, Lorgar changed. He became withdrawn. His legion continued the crusade, but the word-bearers no longer moved with the same certainty. Their Primarch was searching for answers. If the Emperor was not a god, then what was? If the Imperial truth was correct, why did the universe feel as though it contained something far greater? Lorgar began looking deeper. He began researching ancient texts, ancient religions and civilizations, anything that might answer the question his father had refused to answer, and eventually he found something, or rather, something found him. Corferin. Lorgar had not been alone in his search. One of the most influential figures in his life was Corferin, his foster father from Colchis, a man deeply connected to the old faiths. Corferin understood Lorgar's spiritual hunger. He knew his son needed answers, and he encouraged him to keep searching. There were ancient powers in the universe, powers beyond humanity, powers older than the Imperium, powers that existed long before the Emperor. Lorgar had been taught to reject the Emperor's denial. Now, he was beginning to question everything. Erebus. And then there was Erebus, a word-bearer who would become one of the most important and dangerous figures in the entire Horus Heresy. Erebus understood something Lorgar had not yet fully grasped. If the Emperor was not a god, perhaps there were other beings that were. The warp contained powers, ancient entities, forces capable of changing reality itself. Erebus would eventually introduce Lorgar to knowledge that would change the course of human history, but for now, the seeds had only just been planted. The Emperor's mistake. The Emperor believed Monarchia would teach Lorgar discipline. He believed humiliation would correct his son's behavior. Perhaps he believed Lorgar would finally understand the danger of religion. But the Emperor misunderstood his son. Lorgar did not abandon his faith, he abandoned his faith in the Emperor. That difference would prove catastrophic, because when someone loses faith, they don't necessarily stop believing. Sometimes they simply find something else to believe in. A new search. Lorgar began a journey. He would travel, he would investigate, he would search for the truth. His word-bearers would follow. They would study ancient religions, forgotten civilizations, Xenos beliefs, warp phenomena, everything that might reveal the true nature of the universe, and eventually they would discover something. Something the Emperor had desperately wanted humanity to ignore. The Chaos Gods. Lorgar did not immediately understand what they were. At first they appeared to be answers, real gods, powerful beings, entities that actually responded to worship. For Lorgar it was proof that the Emperor had been wrong, proof that gods existed, proof that the universe was far more complicated than the Imperial truth admitted. But there was a problem. The gods did not love Lorgar. They wanted something for him. The first step toward damnation. Lorgar had lost his father. Now he was searching for new gods, and the warp was listening. The Chaos Gods had no need to force him. They simply needed to offer what the Emperor had denied: purpose, meaning, faith and power. And perhaps most importantly, recognition. Lorgar wanted to believe, and the ruinous powers were very willing to give him something to believe in. Monarchia had been destroyed in a single day, but its consequences would last for 10,000 years. The Emperor believed he had corrected a rebellious son. Instead, he had broken one. Lorgar's faith in the Emperor was gone, but his need for faith remained, and somewhere beyond reality, 4 ancient powers waited. They did not need to conquer Lorgar. They only needed him to keep searching, and Lorgar would search. He would find answers, and he would find gods. Eventually, he would discover the truth about chaos, but Lorgar would not be the only Primarch affected by the events that followed, because the Wordbearers were about to begin a journey into the warp, and what they discovered there would eventually bring them into contact with the most dangerous secret in the galaxy, the ruinous powers, the gods of chaos, and the beginning of the end. Brothers begin to drift apart, the cracks beneath the victory. The Great Crusade was winning, world after world joined the Imperium. The Primarchs were becoming legends, but behind the victories, something was changing. The brothers no longer simply competing. They were beginning to resent one another. The Great Crusade continued. From the outside, the Imperium appeared stronger than ever. The Primarchs were conquering worlds, the legions were expanding, humanity was being reunited. But beneath the surface, the Emperor's family was becoming increasingly divided. Not through one great betrayal, not through one catastrophic battle, but through thousands of small disagreements. A comment, an insult, a perceived slight, a victory that went unrecognized, a campaign given to one brother instead of another. The Primarchs were extraordinary beings, but they were still capable of pride, and pride can become dangerous when it is left unchecked. The Lion and his brothers. Lionel Johnson was one of the greatest military commanders in the Imperium, but he was also one of the most secretive. The Lion trusted very few people. Even his brothers sometimes struggled to understand him. He rarely explained his decisions, he expected others to follow. And when he was challenged, he would become cold. This created tension, especially with the Primarchs who valued openness. The Lion did not necessarily distrust his brothers, he simply believed information was power, and information was not something to be handed out freely. This attitude would eventually cause problems. Russ and the Lion. Few rivalries became as legendary as that between the Lion and Leman Russ. They were almost complete opposites. The Lion was controlled, Russ was loud. The Lion was secretive, Russ was direct. The Lion planned, Russ acted. Neither easily backed down. Their rivalry sometimes became physical, but beneath it was respect. Each knew the other was an exceptional warrior. The problem was that the respect did not always prevent conflict. Sometimes it made the conflict worse, because neither Primarch could tolerate being seen as weaker than the other. Fulgrim and Ferrus. The relationship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus was different. They genuinely admired one another. They challenged one another. They competed. They sought perfection in different ways. Fulgrim wanted perfection through artistry. Ferrus wanted perfection through strength. Their friendship was powerful, but it contained a dangerous element: pride. Both Primarchs believed they could push themselves beyond ordinary limitations. Neither was satisfied with simply being great. They wanted to be the best. For now, that ambition brought them closer. But ambition can change, especially when one brother begins to believe the other has surpassed him. Perturabo's resentment. No Primarch carried resentment quite like Perturabo. He knew he was brilliant. He knew he could solve problems other Primarchs could not. He knew the Imperium depended upon him, and yet he was overlooked. The Iron Warriors were given the hardest wars, the worst fortresses, the most brutal of sieges. They were expected to win, and when they did, everyone simply moved on. Perturabo watched other brothers receive admiration. Sanguinius was loved. Gulliman was respected. Russ was celebrated. The Lion was feared, and Horus was trusted. And Perturabo? He was given another fortress, another impossible campaign, another mountain to destroy. His bitterness only grew. Slowly and quietly, but it grew. Mortarian's distrust. Mortarian's distrust. came from never trusting and accepting the Emperor. The events on Barbarous remained with him. He believed the Emperor had taken away his greatest victory. His hatred of tyrants had never disappeared, and now he served one of the greatest rulers in the galaxy. The contradiction bothered him. Mortarion distrusted psychic powers, he distrusted the warp, he distrusted the Emperor's methods, he especially distrusted Magnus. To Mortarion, the warp was poison, something that should never be touched. Magnus disagreed completely, and their rivalry became increasingly bitter. Magnus and the warp. Magnus believed knowledge was power. He knew the warp was dangerous, but he believed danger did not justify ignorance. His psychic abilities were extraordinary. He could communicate across enormous distances, read minds, manipulate reality, see things ordinary humans could not. Magnus believed he was helping humanity understand a fundamental part of existence. The Emperor had warned him to be cautious. Magnus believed he understood the danger. Perhaps he was wrong. Because the warp does not simply offer knowledge, it offers temptation, and sometimes the person seeking knowledge does not realize they are being watched. Angron. Then there was Angron, the Primarch who never truly wanted any of this. The Emperor had saved him from death on Nisseria, but Angron had never forgiven him. The gladiators had been his family. The Emperor had taken him away, and now he was expected to lead a legion, conquer worlds, build an empire, follow orders. Angron saw little meaning in any of it. The World Eaters became increasingly brutal. The Butcher's nails drove Angron towards violence, and every victory seemed to make him angrier. He did not want to be a Primarch. He wanted the freedom he had been denied. But there was no freedom waiting for him. Only war. Kurz. Conrad Kurz was becoming something else entirely. His visions were getting worse. He saw the future, death, fire, and betrayal, his own destruction. Kurz believed these visions were inevitable. If he saw something, then it would happen. And because he believed the future could not be changed, he stopped trying to change himself. He became increasingly brutal, increasingly isolated, increasingly convinced that humanity was inherently corrupt. His brothers saw the change. Some tried to intervene. Others simply stayed away. Kurz became a warning, a Primarch who had begun losing his grip on reality. The Emperor's distance. And through all of this, the Emperor was on terror. His sons were fighting the Great Crusade, but their father was no longer beside them. The Emperor had his reasons. The Webway Project demanded his attention. He believed the future of humanity depended upon it. But from the perspective of his sons, something had changed. Their father was distant, unavailable, secretive. And when they needed answers, they often had to guess. That created uncertainty. Uncertainty created resentment, and resentment created division. Horus's burden. As Warmaster, Horus stood in the middle of it all. He had to manage his brothers, he had to maintain the crusade, he had to interpret the Emperor's wishes, he had to deal with political problems, military problems, personal conflicts, and all the while knowing that his father was somewhere on Terra, working on something Horus did not fully understand. Horus remained loyal, but he was beginning to feel the weight. He was not simply commanding armies, he was carrying his family's problems, and sometimes he wondered whether the Emperor truly understood what he had left behind. Lorgar's transformation. Meanwhile, Lorgar was changing. After Monarchia, he had begun searching for answers. The word bearers travelled farther, studied older civilizations, explored ancient beliefs, investigated the warp, and eventually they found evidence. Evidence that seemed to confirm Lorgar's deepest belief that gods existed. Not one, but four immense powers within the warp. Khorne, the blood god, Tzeentch, the changer of ways, Nurgle, the lord of decay, and Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure. Lorgar did not yet understand what they wanted, but he believed he had found the truth. The Emperor had lied. The gods were real. The Cabal. Everywhere else, another secret was beginning to move. An organization known as the Cabal had been watching humanity. Ancient Xenos, ancient knowledge, ancient plans. They had studied the Emperor, they understood the warp, and they were interested in one particular Primarch, Horus, the Warmaster. They believed Horus would become central to the future of the galaxy, but they were not the only ones watching him. The Chaos Gods had noticed him too. The family begins to break. The Primarchs were still fighting together, still winning, still conquering, but the relationships were changing. Perturabo resented his brothers. Mortarion distrusted Magnus. Angron hated the Emperor. Kurz was losing himself. Lorgar had lost his faith in his father. Magnus was pushing deeper into forbidden knowledge, and Horus was carrying all of them. The Imperium still looked united, but the family at its center wasn't. The illusion of unity. This is perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Great Crusade. The Imperium believed its Primarchs were one family. The citizens saw them together. The legions fought beside one another. The Emperor's banners flew across the galaxy, but beneath those banners there were arguments, jealousies, resentments, and secrets. The Primarchs were not one mind, they were 20. And every one of those minds was moving toward a different future. The Great Crusade continued, the Imperium grew. The Emperor worked in secret, Horus commanded, and the Primarchs fought. The Golden Age was beginning to fade. The cracks were no longer invisible, they were spreading. The question was no longer whether the Primarchs would disagree. They already did. The question was, what would happen when those disagreements became impossible to contain? And at the center of that question stood Horus, the Warmaster, the Emperor's chosen son, the brother everyone trusted, the man carrying the weight of the Imperium. He believed he was strong enough, he believed his loyalty was absolute, he believed nothing could change that. But somewhere in the galaxy, a world called Davin was awaiting, and Horus was about to be wounded, not merely in body, but in his faith, his loyalty, and eventually, his soul. Horus bears the weight, the Warmaster's burden. Horus Lupercal had been chosen above his brothers. He was the Warmaster, the Emperor's most trusted son, the commander of the Great Crusade. But power has a price, and Horus was beginning to pay it. The Great Crusade continued. Thousands of worlds remained outside Imperial control. The fleets moved from system to system. The legions fought constantly. And at the center of it all was Horus, the Warmaster. Every major campaign eventually came across his desk. Every disagreement between Primarchs could become his problem. Every failure could be blamed on his command. The Emperor had given Horus authority. He had also given him something far heavier: responsibility. The Warmaster. Horus had once fought beside the Emperor. He had been able to look toward his father and know exactly what was expected of him. Now he had to make those decisions himself. The Emperor was thousands of light years away. Terror was becoming increasingly distant. The Webway Project remained secret, and Horus had no idea exactly what his father was doing. That secrecy bothered him. Not because Horus distrusted the Emperor, not yet, but because he had spent most of his life believing that he and his father shared everything. Now there were things the Emperor would not tell him. The Council of War. The Primarchs continued to meet. Plans were discussed. Strategies were debated. Campaigns were assigned. But Horus had to maintain order amongst 20 extraordinary personalities. The Lion questioned decisions. Russ challenged authority. Perturabo demanded recognition. Magnus offered advice, whether it was wanted or not. Angron often refused to cooperate. Gulliman wanted structure. The Khan wanted freedom. Mortarion distrusted almost everyone. And Lorgar was becoming increasingly withdrawn, Horus had to keep them together, because if the Primarchs divided, the Imperium could divide with them. Horus and his sons. But there was another responsibility, the Lunar Wolves, Horus's legion, his sons. They idolized him. To them, Horus was more than their commander, he was their father, their inspiration, and their example. The Lunar Wolves had become one of the most successful legions of the entire Great Crusade. They fought aggressively, they adapted quickly and were very disciplined. They trusted their Primarch completely, and Horus trusted them, especially one warrior, Garviel Loken, a relatively young captain who represented the old ideals of the Legion: honor, brotherhood, and loyalty. The kind of loyalty Horus believed the entire Imperium was built upon. The Mournival. Horus also surrounded himself with trusted advisors, the Mournival, a group of senior warriors who could advise the Warmaster. They were not simply servants. They could challenge him, question him, tell him when they believed he was making a mistake. This was important because Horus understood that a leader who only heard agreement would eventually make terrible decisions. Among them was Ezekiel Abaddon, one of Horus's most powerful and influential captains. Abaddon admired Horus deeply, but he also possessed an enormous personality of his own, and his loyalty to Horus would eventually become one of the most important relationships in the coming catastrophe. Victory after victory. For a while, everything seemed fine. Horus continued winning. The Lunar Wolves conquered world after world. The Warmaster's reputation grew. He was brilliant, charismatic, and confident. He could inspire ordinary soldiers. He could negotiate with planetary rulers. He could stand beside another Primarch without immediately provoking conflict. The Emperor had made the correct choice, or so it seemed. But there was one other thing Horus could not conquer: his own doubts. The Emperor's absence. Horus missed his father. The fact was rarely discussed, but it was there. The Emperor had been the center of Horus's life. Now he was gone. Horus sometimes wondered what the Emperor thought of his decisions. Did he approve? Was the Crusade moving fast enough? Was Horus doing enough? Was he becoming the leader his father wanted? These questions remained unanswered, and unanswered questions can become dangerous. The triumphs of Ullanor. Then came one of the greatest victories of the Great Crusade, Ullanor. The Orcs had created a massive empire, a threat so large that the Emperor personally joined the campaign. The Imperial forces launched an enormous assault. The Primarchs fought together, the legions fought together, and the Orcs were destroyed. Ullanor became one of the defining victories of the Great Crusade, and afterward, the Emperor did something extraordinary. He elevated Horus. He made Horus the Warmaster, officially the highest military authority in the Imperium. For Horus, it should have been the greatest moment of his life, but it also marked the beginning of his separation from his father. The Emperor returned to Terra, Horus stayed behind, and now responsibility was entirely his. The weight of Ullanor. The victory at Ullanor was enormous. The Imperium celebrated, the Primarchs celebrated, Horus celebrated, but the Warmaster knew the truth. There would always be another war, another enemy, another world, another decision. The Crusade had no end in sight, and every decision came with consequences. Horus began to understand something. Being Warmaster did not mean being the Emperor. He had authority, but he did not have his father's absolute power. He had to persuade, negotiate, compromise, and sometimes he had to accept decisions he personally disagreed with. But that was leadership. But it was exhausting. The Davin campaign. Then came Davin. The world had once been brought into Imperial compliance, but something had gone wrong. The planet had rebelled. Reports indicated corruption. The Warmaster was dispatched. Horus and his legion arrived, and at first it appeared to be another campaign, another rebellion, another victory waiting to happen. But Davin was different. The planet had history, an ancient one. Its population had developed strange beliefs. Its people worshipped powers that existed beyond the material universe. The Imperium dismissed these beliefs as superstition. Horus did not yet, but he would soon encounter something he could not explain. The battle on Davin. The fighting was brutal. The Lunar Wolves advanced. They faced resistance, but the Legion was experienced. The campaign seemed manageable, then Horus was wounded, seriously wounded. The Warmaster had fallen. The man who had conquered countless worlds was suddenly dying. His sons surrounded him. The greatest warrior in the Imperium was helpless. For the first time, the Lunar Wolves faced something they could not simply shoot, something they could not outflank or conquer. They faced a death. The Serpent Lodge. And then someone offered them another option, a place called the Serpent Lodge. The lodge had existed on Davin for generations. It possessed ancient knowledge. Its members claimed they could save Horus, but their methods were not imperial. They did not rely upon medicine, they relied upon the warp. The Mournival was divided. Some believed the lodge could save their Primarch, others were suspicious. But Horus was dying, and desperation makes people vulnerable. The choice. Horus's sons wanted their father back. They were willing to do almost anything. The Serpent Lodge promised they could help, but there was a price. Horus would have to enter the warp. He would have to confront visions, memories, possibilities, lies, truths. The forces of chaos were beginning to reach toward him, not through armies, not through weapons, but through his mind. The Warmaster's vision. Horus entered the darkness, and there he saw things, a future, a possible future, a future where the Emperor had abandoned his sons, a future where the Primarchs were forgotten, a future where humanity suffered beneath the Emperor's rule. Horus was shown vision designed to make him angry, to make him doubt, to make him question. And the most dangerous thing about the visions was that some of them contained fragments of the truth. The Emperor had kept secrets. The Emperor had left his sons behind. The Emperor was building something on Terra, and the Primarchs did not know what it was. Chaos took those truths and wrapped them in lies. Erebus. Horus encountered someone unexpected. Erebus, a warrior of the Word-Bearers, a brother legion, a trusted servant of the Imperium. At least that's what Horus believed. Erebus presented himself as someone who understood the truth. He told Horus that the Emperor had lied, and that the Primarchs had been used, that the Emperor intended to abandon them, that Horus deserved more. Erebus did not need to command Horus. He only needed to plant the idea, and that idea was doubt. The choice before Horus. Horus stood between two futures. One was loyalty, the Emperor's dream, the Imperium, humanity. The other was rebellion, power, freedom and revenge, and perhaps a chance to finally stand as the equal of his father. The Warmaster had spent his entire life trying to earn the Emperor's approval. Now Chaos whispered something far more dangerous. You do not need his approval. You could replace him. Horus was not lost yet. This is important. Horus did not simply wake up one morning and decide to betray humanity. His fall was not instantaneous. He was wounded, physically, emotionally, psychologically. He was surrounded by people manipulating him. He was shown careful, constructed visions. He was told half-truths. He was encouraged to question his father's motives, and while he was vulnerable, chaos reached through the cracks. The Warmaster was still fighting, still resisting, still trying to understand, but the first seed had been planted. Horus survived, but he did not leave Davin unchanged. The Warmaster returned to his legion, the campaign continued. The Imperium continued, the Great Crusade continued, but something had changed. Horus had seen things he could not forget. He had heard accusations against his father. He had begun questioning the Emperor's motives, and perhaps worst of all, he had begun wondering whether his father truly loved him. That question would follow him, because the Warmaster had spent his entire life trying to become worthy of the Emperor. Now someone had convinced him that the Emperor had never truly valued him at all. The next step would not be rebellion, not yet. First, Horus would have to decide whether the Emperor's dream was worth believing in, and while Horus struggled with that question, another Primarch was about to make a decision of his own. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, the scholar who believed he could master the warp, and his greatest mistake was coming. The calm before the storm, the beginning of the end. The Great Crusade was still winning, the Imperium still expanding, the Primarchs were still loyal, and humanity had never been stronger, but the Age of Triumph was coming to an end. For more than 2 centuries, the Great Crusade had carried humanity across the galaxy. World after world had been reclaimed, the legions had defeated countless enemies, the Primarchs had become legends, and the Emperor's dreams seemed closer than ever. But history rarely announces the moment when everything begins to go wrong. There was no great warning, no thunder across the heavens, no voice declaring that an empire is about to fall. Sometimes the end begins quietly, with a decision, a secret, a wound, a whisper, and by the time anyone understands what is happening, it is already too late. The Imperium at its greatest. At the height of the Great Crusade, the Imperium was almost impossible to challenge. The Legionaries Astartes were among the most powerful armies humanity had ever created. The Imperial Army filled countless worlds. The Imperial Navy controlled vast stretches of space. The Mechanicum of Mars supplied weapons and technology. The Primarchs commanded forces capable of conquering entire civilizations. And above them all stood the Emperor, or so humanity believed. Because while the galaxy saw the Emperor as the leader of the Great Crusade, he had already withdrawn from the war. His attention was elsewhere, on Terra. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was working on a project that almost none of his sons understood. The Webway. The Emperor's secret. The Emperor believed humanity's dependence on the warp was one of his greatest weaknesses. Warp travel was dangerous, astropaths were vulnerable, navigators were essential, and every journey through the Imperium exposed humanity to the forces that could not truly be controlled. The Emperor wanted another path. A human-controlled route through the Webway, a network that could allow humanity to travel between worlds without relying upon the warp in the same way. If he succeeded, humanity could potentially escape one of the greatest dangers facing it. But the project demanded secrecy, absolute secrecy, even from many of his sons, and that secrecy created a problem. The Primarchs were left wondering, what exactly was their father doing? Horus. And then there was Horus. The Warmaster had survived Davin, but the experience had changed him. He had seen visions, he had heard accusations. He had been shown possible futures, and the doubts remained. The Emperor had left him with enormous responsibility, yet the Emperor had not explained everything. Horus began questioning the decisions of his father, not openly, not yet, but the questions were there. Why had the Emperor abandoned the Crusade? Why had he returned to Terra? And what was he building? Why had he trusted Horus with the galaxy, but not with the truth? The Warmaster still loved his father, still believed in the Imperium, but certainty was beginning to disappear. Lorgar. Far away, Lorgar had travelled an entirely different road. Monarchia had destroyed his faith in the Emperor, but had not destroyed his need for faith. The word-bearers began searching. They studied ancient religions, forgotten civilization and warp phenomena, old legends, and eventually they discovered the Chaos Gods. The powers of the warp were real. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, 4 great powers, 4 gods, and to Lorgar this was confirmation. The Emperor had been wrong, and gods existed. But Lorgar did not understand the price of worship. He believed he had discovered the truth. In reality, he had opened the door to damnation. Magnus. Then there was Magnus. Magnus had always believed that knowledge was humanity's greatest weapon, but warp fascinated him. Its mysteries seemed endless, and Magnus believed he could understand them. He believed psychic power could be controlled. He believed humanity could master the Imperium without becoming its slave. The Emperor had warned him, but Magnus believed he understood the danger, and perhaps that was his greatest weakness, because the warp does not need to defeat someone through force. It only needs them to believe that they are smarter than it is. The Primarchs drift further apart. Across the galaxy, the Primarchs continued their campaigns, but the relationships between them were becoming increasingly complicated. Perturabo carried resentment, Mortarion distrusted Magnus, Angron remained trapped in his rage, Kurz descended further into darkness, Lorgar sought new gods, Magnus sought forbidden knowledge, and Horus was beginning to doubt his father. The Imperium remained united on paper, but its greatest leaders were moving in different directions. The Emperor had created 20 sons, but he had never created 20 identical minds, and now those differences were becoming dangerous. The Alpha Legion. And somewhere in the shadows another legion was beginning to make itself known, the Alpha Legion, the 20th. Unlike almost every other legion, the Alpha Legion preferred not to exactly reveal what it was doing. Infiltration, espionage, sabotage, false identities and misdirection. The Alpha Legion could enter a conflict without the enemy even realizing they were there, and at the center of this mysterious legion stood its Primarch, Alpharius, or at least, that's what everyone thought. Even among the Primarchs, the Alpha Legion remained difficult to understand, and as the Great Crusade approached its final years, their importance would become far greater, because when the galaxy began to fall apart, the Alpha Legion would already be several moves ahead. The Great Crusade reaches its limit. The Imperium continued expanding, but eventually, there were fewer great civilizations left to conquer. The Crusade was approaching its ultimate objective. Humanity was being reunited. The dream was becoming reality. But this created another problem. What happens when the war ends? The Primarchs had been created to conquer. The legions had been created for war. The entire Imperium had been built around the Great Crusade. What would happen when there were no more worlds to conquer? What would happen to the Primarchs? What would happen to the legions? And what would be their purpose? The Emperor knew the Crusade could not continue forever, and perhaps that was another reason he had begun to prepare for the future, but his sons did not know that. The questions of the Primarchs. The Primarchs were beginning to wonder about their futures. Guilliman had Ultramar, Dawn had his fortresses, Vulcan had his people, the Khan had his freedom, but others had nothing beyond war. Perturabo knew war, Angron knew war, the World Eaters knew war, the Iron Warriors knew war, and the Night Lords knew war. The Great Crusade had given these Primarchs purpose. What would happen when that purpose disappeared? The Emperor had an answer, but he did not tell them, and once again silence created suspicion. The shadows of chaos. The Chaos Gods were patient. They did not need to destroy the Imperium immediately. They had watched humanity for thousands of years. They understood its weaknesses: pride, anger, greed, desire, fear. The Emperor had tried to defeat them by denying their existence, but the warp did not care whether humanity believed in the gods. They existed regardless, and now the Emperor's own sons were beginning to come within their reach. Lorgar had already opened the door. Horus had been wounded. Magnus was reaching into the warp. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection was becoming dangerous. Angron's rage was consuming him. Kurz was losing himself. The pieces were beginning to move. The Warmaster's future. Horus returned to the Great Crusade. He continued to lead, win, and he continued to smile. To the outside world, nothing had changed. The Warmaster was still loyal, still brilliant, still respected, but inside the questions continued. and those questions would eventually bring him into contact with men who claimed to know the truth. Men who would tell him that the Emperor had betrayed him, that Primarchs were disposable, that the Imperium could belong to them, and that Horus could become more than the Emperor's son. He could become the leader of a new age. The calm before the storm. The galaxy was quiet, not truly quiet. Wars continued, worlds were conquered, enemies were destroyed. But compared to what was coming, it was quiet. The Imperium was standing at the edge of its greatest achievement. Humanity had survived Old Night. The Primarchs had been reunited. The Great Crusade had conquered vast regions of the galaxy. The Emperor's dream seemed almost complete, and yet the greatest threat to the Imperium was no longer outside its borders. It was inside them. The enemy was not approaching from another galaxy. It was already among the Primarchs, already among the legions, already within the hearts of the Emperor's sons. The final pieces. Lorgar had found the gods, Horus had been wounded, Magnus had begun reaching deeper into the warp, the Emperor remained isolated on Terra, the Primarchs were divided by old rivalries, and chaos was waiting. Everything was in place. All that remained was for someone to make that first move. The Great Crusade had reached its twilight. Humanity had conquered more than anyone believed possible. The Imperium stood at the height of its power. The Emperor was closer than ever to completing his secret plan. The Primarchs stood at the peak of their glory, and yet this would be the last moment of peace. Because the greatest tragedy in human history was about to begin, not with an alien invasion, not with the destruction of Terra, not with the death of a Primarch. It would begin with a brother, a wounded brother, a trusted brother, the Emperor's favourite son, Horus Lupercal. He would be offered a choice, loyalty or rebellion, and when Horus finally made that choice, the galaxy would burn. The Great Crusade was over. The age of conquest was ending. The Emperor had returned to Terra. The Warmaster stood at the head of the Imperium. The Primarchs had become legends, and humanity believed its greatest days were ahead. They were wrong, because the next chapter of the story would not be about conquest, it would be about betrayal. In the next episode, the fall of Horus.